writes a lot about monetization, and so we're excited to have him speak.
Hey everybody.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Thanks, Jacob. Great to be here. See familiar faces and then some new faces. It's really fun, always. I'll do a kind of high-level talk about monetization in VR. I'm going to explore some of the trends, some of the different use cases and examples that we've been seeing. A little bit about myself. I'm a military officer, a software engineer in my past. Started a few companies, did my MBA, and then GM at Upload VR. Before Upload, I was at River Studios creating content, so I have a little bit of insight on content creation pipeline and how to monetize. I'm going to shamelessly promote Upload. Where's Jacob? I hope I'm not being an ass. How many people know Upload? How many people know they have an awesome collective space that you can work at? Good. It's really amazing space. I'm heavily involved in making it better, and we're launching an LA office soon. So be involved. We have great events and great mentors. Shout out to Tony back there. And then VR amenities, holodeck rooms, and everything. Get involved. Come check us out. Mission and 11th. So why are we so excited about VR? Before that, a quick show of hands. How many people would define themselves as beginners in VR? How many people are like somewhere in the middle? And then experts? Okay, good, great. So why are we so excited about VR? Because it's a new computing platform, it's a new medium, it's not a use case, it's not just for gaming, it's not just for entertainment. It has all these different use cases. I can name a couple of companies in each of those spaces right now building the next frontier of apps, of technologies, of experiences. When we talk about the ecosystem of VR, usually we talk about hardware and distribution, software and platforms and content, and obviously some players play in more than one circle. So you could Google this online. There's also a great ecosystem app by Tipatat. I recommend to follow it and check it out. This is how technology gets adopted. This model is widely used. Most of the people know this. How many people have seen this before? Okay. So most of the time people ask me, when will we see VR becoming mainstream? When will most people have this technology and be users, be consumers? And this has a natural cadence that I'm going to show in a minute. But anybody knows how this is called right there? Chasm. The chasm, exactly. So I believe this is where we are. This is where technology is kind of well thought out. It's ready. It's consumerized. Early versions are out there. But then there's this big question: is this going to get widely adopted by people and kind of skyrocket, or is it still going to die out, or is it still going to stay somewhere in the middle? So I believe this is where we are. The innovators are already using the technology. Some early adopters are buying it. It's going to take a while until early majority, late majority, and laggers. And a quick note on that, I hope I'm not going to confuse you, but I think what we're seeing is there's huge efforts being made to push adoption, to force almost adoption on consumer categories that are not really ready for it. So people buying a Note 7, well, don't buy a Note 7, but if you're buying an Edge phone or those type of things and you get a headset with it, you could be here, because that's cell phone adoption. But then you're being thrown into the VR space and you don't know what to do with it. That's why we see engagement numbers being where they are, which are not great, just because it takes a few iterations for people. If you give a VR device to an innovator or early adopters, they say, this is awesome. But if you give it to a late majority, they say, there's nothing here, it's not ready, I get sick. So it's just, they're not ready. And I think that's what we're seeing in many cases. But I just want to put it out there. These are the numbers in the population, more or less. So usually I do kind of the exercise of who's the innovator, who's the early adopter, that kind of thing, but we don't have time. It's just interesting that most people kind of push themselves down, but it's usually not really true, the chasm. So we actually have a lot of data about technology adoption since the beginning of the previous century. Ever since electricity and telephone and radio and TV and PC, mobile phones and internet, smartphones, what we actually see is that adoption rate accelerates. It takes less time for technology to get adopted. And that makes sense, right? The world is better connected. We have better distribution channels. The world is smaller nowadays because of the internet, because of generally people have more money. But still, on the flip side, it takes several years for that to happen. This is for 25% adoption. So smartphones took 4 years to reach 25% adoption from the first consumer-ready product. And that's something to keep in mind when people ask, when is it going to happen? You know, if I think April 5th or March 28th was when Rift launched. I mean, we can think about the DK2 as being the first one. We can think about the Rift or the Vive, but it's going to take 2 or 3 years in my mind. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, one last word before we actually go to monetization. So I want to talk to you about how content is being produced, distributed, and consumed right now. So what we mostly see in content is either marketing videos or user-generated content, right? You've seen the 360 videos going on Facebook and YouTube and that kind of thing. And then there's several platforms like Viridio and Little Star and those guys. So that's how it's actually being distributed. These are uncurated platforms. Anybody can post. So for the user's perspective, they don't pay. And the hope is that there's enough users there that there's going to be ad revenue. So that's the model there. People watch it on their devices. It's free for users. People want to get maximum exposure. It's ad revenue model, and it requires a lot of user volume for it to actually be a business. What is not in existence and starting to become is the premium content. It's paid for by consumers. And when we're thinking about traditional content, we can think about Netflix, we can think about Amazon, but also about TV, cable, about cinema. People pay, consumers pay to watch that content, it's premium content. And that's something we're starting to see with movies, we'll not call it fiction, but we're starting to see movies in 360 being produced. We're starting to see sports events and music events broadcasted by companies like NextVR and Vantage TV and the likes. And probably we're going to see Netflix and Hulu and Amazon flip the switch and starting to distribute that just because they have just such a massive customer base to activate. But maybe there's going to be newcomers. Jaunt has its own distribution, premium distribution platform. Weaver has its own with transport. So hopefully we'll see that higher end devices once they're penetrated into the market, and then it's paid by consumers and VOD. So I want you to keep that in mind. This is where things are, but this is coming. Okay, content. So it's not really for content. This one is for hardware, and it's the most simple one, I think. What makes most sense. HMDs, cameras, input devices, microphones. You buy, you rent them. It's old school, right? That's how you buy and rent cameras, and you buy and rent TVs outside. It's kind of the same. The channels, brick and mortar, are online. So if you have a VR camera, if you have a 360 microphone, if you have an input device, basically that's how you go to market. That's how you let people buy it. It's pretty straightforward. Next up is software. We're seeing a lot of SaaS and licensing, borrowing from traditional business models, or go to market. We see tools like Unity and Retina. We see plugins new by the Foundry. We see cloud services like Streambox. They offer streaming services. We see applications like Iris VR that just closed around. They announced a few products. They do real estate for VR. So those people who create software, the way for them to get paid is through SaaS and licensing. They offer seats. They offer that kind of stuff. And then we see software being made pay-to-play, premium, or in-app purchases. So games like Raw Data just crossed, I think, the $1 million in revenue, one of the first ones. Sergios as well. Basically, the way to acquire a game, if you are a VR game developer, you put it on Steam, you put it on the Oculus store, and you get paid. Very, very straightforward. For entertainment, I wanted to put in Sports Illustrated just because they did something really interesting. They worked with Weaver, I think, and somebody else to create 360 videos around their calendar shoots. They took models, they did their normal kind of 2D event or photography, but they also created that in 360. And if you go to the actual Sports Illustrated app, it wasn't a unique 360 app that you have to download. It was the same app that people use to see whatever they see there. And then they had basically a little icon with a little cardboard on it, that if you click on it, 2 minutes, if you click on it, you see all this content 360. The 2 of the pieces were free and then the rest were paid. So that's in-app purchases, right? And that is a very valid way, a very proven way to sell content. So that's something Sports Illustrated, we did the same with the Denver Broncos when I was back in River. So that's something to keep in mind, that in-app purchases, especially on mobile VR, is something that is very valid. Distribution, subscription, we talked about content. So Netflix or Jaunt or Inception or Weaver, Transport could charge, they don't yet, but could charge a subscription fee, right? It's exactly like the cable does, that kind of thing. Or you have pay-to-play, location-based, like Six Flags, you pay money and you consume a VR product. The Void, you pay to get in, and it's like a theme park, it's really cool. You walk in with a VR device and you're battling on all these worlds. Or you have platforms, basically on Steam, you pay and Steam gets a cut of that, and then Oculus the same. Sorry to rush through this. I will make these available to anybody who wants them. But I don't know that this is earth-shattering information, to be completely honest. Production, commission, Weaver, and Felix and Paul, and within Concept VR, these are people who actually create the content, and they get paid to do the content. It's traditional production work, right? It's very, very classic. And then revenue share, I put these two, because I don't know of any other company that's doing revenue share, but I know that we did. So I wanted to put it out there. When we were working with Bjork, we were working with the Denver Broncos, there were some that were paid up front, and then we did revenue share on consumption. And that's something that is makes it easier, I think, nowadays when people are less kind of prone to spend a lot of money on it, and you're basically betting on the product to really succeed and get the tail end of that. What we're going to see in the future, some models, some use cases. E-commerce is something that I'm very bullish on, and VR, AR, pay-per-view like TV or streaming web for events, distribution rights for films. When we're starting to see films produced, we'll probably see something very similar to how distribution rights work in the film industry nowadays. Ads, like the internet, when there's going to be enough volume out there for people to really move the needle on ad sales. And then product placement, again, for social, for example, sponsorships, that kind of marketplace. And those are some of the companies that are active. IKEA is building a VR experience. You'll be able to shop, so that's e-commerce. Baobab, pay-per-view maybe, when they're creating a film. NextVR is doing live stream of sports and music. Penrose the same. Universal Studio could be location-based. Google for ads, obviously that makes a lot of sense, and Facebook as well. So that's kind of the thing. So these are the future of some of the things that we'll see. We'll probably see more things that we don't really know. SaaS is a good example that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, nobody knew that SaaS will be, but people really thought of that being kind of innovators in business making and thinking of that instead of actually paying one time for a product to create that understanding of customer acquisition cost and lifetime value and understanding that there's an ongoing relationship, it's a service, basically. So we'll see those coming together. I don't know how they look like, but it's going to be fascinating to see. What really fascinates me, 1 minute, to see is not only the business models and monetization strategies, but what are the human behaviors that we will see in VR? And here's what I mean. So 15 years ago, nobody did that.
Oh, right.
And then they did that. And then they emailed the photo to every one of their friends. I didn't do it, nobody did it. But for some unexplainable reason, this is a thing. We photograph our food and send it to our friends on Instagram.
It's so easy.
Shamelessly.
So what are the human behaviors? There's something innate, something in us as human beings want to send photos of food to our friends. What are those human behaviors? Weird ones. They're gonna, or not weird ones. There's gonna be unlocked with this new technology that's coming together and the different tools and making things easy. What is that thing that's gonna be easy to do that's gonna be super weird for us to look back on? So
I think that's because it's ephemeral.
could be. We have time for questions.
minutes, got it.
Yeah, definitely. We have 7 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, where do you come down in terms of 360 video? A lot of people talk about 360 video as VR. It's clearly not VR, but it's more accessible. More people can see and experience a 360 video and kind of get an understanding of what VR should be. So, to the point that you started on in terms of commercialization, how is 360 video a precursor to VR? Is it connected to VR? Is it somewhere in between VR and AR? Because, one of the companies I'm dealing with is working to pitch brands on doing VR experiences. And one of the key questions they're getting asked by the brands is, how do we get a lot of people to experience it if we can't stick people inside of headsets, which limits the number of people who can experience this to only physical, manifestations of it.
Yeah.
So what's a good answer?
There's a few parts of that question. I'll try to make it really concise. I'm not picky and petty when we talk about terminology. And I think VR is a spectrum. And the spectrum is immersiveness. So 360 is probably the lowest form of immersiveness. To me, it's still on the spectrum, right? A full-on experience, if I'm wearing gloves and a suit and a sub-tap and an HMD, and I see my avatar, that's like the ultimate. So that's to the other end of the spectrum. So I do think that 360 is a valid form of VR. I'm not picky about people saying to me, I'm in VR, I do 360 videos, and I say, no, you're not. You're beneath us almost. No, absolutely not. I think it's valid, and I think the fact that a lot of people have access to mobile phones that actually can run VR is a great stepping stone and understand what that is. Because in VR, seeing is believing. So kind of that out of the gates. I am not especially bullish about 360 videos. I think the fact that it's flat video is limiting. I have not seen enough non-horror, non-documentary things to show me that maybe I'm not being a visionary, honestly. Maybe it's good that I'm not in content creation anymore. But I just don't, and I was really bullish to begin with, and I just didn't see. I think the future of storytelling in VR is in volumetric content. When you capture 3D people and you're able to move around the space and you're able to actually experience the story from a different perspective. If you guys don't know what volumetric is, it's basically what this is not a 360 camera. What 360 cameras do, they snap a flat image of the world. They capture many of them and then you stitch it together. And they create a sphere that the viewer is within, that sphere, and watching it. It's still flat video. You can't look around things. What volumetric content capture does is capture these assets in 3D, and it's photorealism, basically. So if you think about one of the most awesome scenes of all time, in the Pulp Fiction scene when they're dancing on the stage there, imagine you being able to walk around the diner and seeing the scene from every different vantage point. So that would be really cool. So I think that's going to be really interesting to explore for content. And 360 could probably have good use cases for enterprise with, we talk about real estate, we talk about training, those types of things. Storytelling, I think we'll see. I'm not extremely bullish. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to follow that up briefly. My team is working on a patented stitching of 360 video into VR. So you don't have to choose between one or the other. And VR,
Between what?
pardon me?
Between
VR or 360 video.
Okay.
Okay. So you can combine them because there's stitching capabilities now.
Okay. I'm not sure that I understand. To me, 360 is a form of VR. What's
So
the
in
question?
360, so in VR, you could have a model of this space. So you imagine that you're in this space, but it's just a model.
Okay.
And you could have a camera that is mounted up where that device is in the corner, and you can click on it in the model. And then you can be in a camera view of us here.
Yeah.
So maybe the model is an empty room.
Kind of like
here.
what Matterport does.
Matterport doesn't take you to the real place. It's all a model.
Okay.
Okay? Because you're seeing the inside of a house for
Yeah.
sale on Matterport, but you're not seeing the people who are sitting in that room at that moment.
Got it.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, you talked about so many different things, so I might have missed a couple things. But did you talk about the idea of analytics?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, there's a company called Retinad that's
Yeah.
building software that could be embedded in people's in a player. So if you're building a player for VR 360 videos, you can use their product. It's
Yeah.
an SDK, drag and drop, and then you have access to a dashboard, exactly like analytics
Yeah.
in traditional video or online, in web pages, and you see a heat map of where
Yeah.
people looked at, and you
Right.
see usage time, you see those kind of statistics.
Because it's, in a way, it's easier to trace.
It
than
is.
in real world.
What was the name of the company?
Retinad. Yeah, and I can make this accessible. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So you hit on the proven monetization strategies in pre-VR plans, right? So
In VR, all the companies that I mentioned are VR companies.
Okay, but maybe the monetization model came from other areas.
Yeah, traditional. Yeah.
Traditional. What have people proposed that you've heard where you've thought, wow, that's not even okay? Wow, all right.
Yeah.
Where does this
That's
go?
a great question. I haven't. Not yet. I think
Yeah.
what's a traditional, and I'll let you finish in a second. What's really we're seeing with every form of new wave of innovation, you see people migrate the old into the new. That's the first step. It's kind of like what publishing was on the web initially. It sucked. And then people understand the medium, understand how to really navigate and how to create a different user experience, to build a different way to interact with the medium. That then all of a sudden makes sense and it starts to fall into place. So in that respect, I think we're still in phase one where people are migrating the old to the new. What was the last point that you wanted to make?
I was just going to say, like, I've read about, for instance, I forget which book it was, but it was on it was monetizing innovation, but they were talking about how tire companies have aligned the amount of, like, tread usage with the amount they charge. And I'm wondering, like, so as your value goes up using that tire, you get charged more, and I'm wondering how, like, 'cause that idea makes a ton of sense to me, is to align the value with what people are actually receiving, and, like, how do you get to that, right? Is the idea. And I was wondering if someone had proposed any ideas on that
Not that
at
heard.
all. Okay.
Maybe one more question.
Yeah.
I recently saw a pets thing that you like every one that you just showed could implement this API, and everywhere you go, your like a virtual pet comes with you.
Okay.
And I never, like, as being around for mobile for my business, I never saw anything that like actually rippled across as an API to everybody, and was also like something people actually fucking want, like people want their dog or cat. And it's like the weirdest thing I've heard of, but I was like, this brilliant. Like, have you heard anything along those lines of like these persistent things, like persistent avatars, something like an API or something that you would take with you through multiple experiences like this?
I haven't. There's one company that I just learned about. That was at the VRDC. It was one of the sponsors. Do you guys remember what that was? Model 3D, maybe? Morph 3D. And they're doing avatars that are supposed to be consistent. So wherever you go,
Okay, so
do the same.
yeah.
Because lack of body is a real issue with VR, right?
Yeah,
But that's
yeah.
going to be solved,
Yeah.
I would imagine, pretty soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sivan, thank you very much.